Hey everybody, we're live with my friend Bill Carroll, and who's also our Zennie62Media NFL draft expert. Bill, how you doing?
It's this is getting close to the end. I'm sometime the next day or two. I'm going to finalize about 350 to 400 player rankings, and get ready for the draft.
Nice. Hey, curious to know. This is going to be a very historic. Well, this draft will make history because it quite possibly will have the most black quarterbacks going in the first round ever, right?
And probably the largest number of black quarterbacks selected in a draft as well. I mean, everyone's focusing on the guys early, but people like Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Jaron Hall are going to go as well. So we're going to see, once you talk about the guys going early, right? So we got 3 going very early. Then somewhere, I would say in the top 4 to 10 picks of the second round, you're going to, if not earlier, you're going to see Hendon Hooker go, Allen Hendon Hooker go. And like I said, Jaron Hall and Dorian Thompson-Robinson are going to be selected at some point. So it's going to be a history-making draft.
What does this say about the black quarterback in the NFL?
It says that if not for unnecessary external forces, this would have happened 50 or 60 years ago. There's a long list of players from Sandy Stevens to, I mean, how far back do you want to go? Kenny Washington. I mean, there's a long list of guys who would have had long and successful NFL careers at quarterback, if not for the fact they weren't allowed to play quarterback. Who knows what happens to Tony Dungy's career if he isn't forced to play nickelback? Who knows what happens to Raphael Cherry's career if he isn't forced to play safety? What happens to Conrad Holloway's career if he isn't forced to go to Canada? I mean, Warren Moon would still hold a bunch of records if he doesn't spend 5 of his prime years in the CFL.
Right.
So while I am happy for what is happening, and nothing will diminish the fact that I am pleased by this, I can't help, as a person who's a bit of a football historian, but be a little saddened also for what we've lost, what we didn't get to have for so many decades. From the very beginning of professional football, there were black players playing. I mean, one of the things that influenced Branch Rickey to want to integrate baseball was the fact that he played football with, semi-pro football with, and played baseball, college and semi-pro baseball, against a man, Charles Follis, who was one of the earliest, maybe the earliest, depending on how you define professional football, one of the earliest African-Americans, or the earliest African-American to play professional football. So we were there right at the beginning, from the jump. And it wasn't until the brownout of 1934, lasting until the reintegration of the game in 1946, that there were players all throughout, good ones, great ones. I mean, Paul Robeson, who, had other options, but he was a terrific football player and played at a very high level. John Whitman, Inky Mayo, who is in both the College Football and the Blues Hall of Fame. That's a double whammy. I don't think anyone else has ever pulled off.
The Blues Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Though he wasn't a performer, he was an early music executive. Frankly, his life should be a movie. He's a fascinating individual. And he also was a terrific track athlete, as many of these early black players were. But there's all these great players who are just beginning to really build up. We have 6 at one point black football players in the NFL. And that was apparently too many, because every year after that, the number goes down until finally the number goes to 0 when they forced Joe Lillard. And Joe Lillard is another person who has a fascinating academic and athletic career. So Joe Lillard was a terrific basketball player, terrific football player, terrific track athlete, terrific baseball player. He could have done anything. He played on one of the earliest all-black professional basketball teams, the Savoy Five, that played against the Harlem Renaissance, the Harlem Wrens, who were another terrific professional all-black basketball team. He ran track at a high level at Oregon. He was a 200-meter and 100-meter champion in a forerunner of the Pac-12 or Pac-10 or Pac-8 or Pac whatever. But just, even before it was just, I think it was called the Western Conference. No, the Western Coast Conference. Don't quote me, but something like that before it became the Pac-8 and then the Pac-10 and the Pac-12. But he was a terrific all-around athlete. But he also didn't suffer racism. He would fight back and he would complain and he would go at his coaches like, "Why aren't you doing anything to protect me?" And so they were happy to, not happy, I shouldn't say happy, but they pushed him out of the league with a little bit of smirk on their faces because he was always known as kind of uppity or whatever term I'm going to use. And even his coach talked about it. Like, we did it for Joe's protection, right? Because we noticed that, you know, white players, especially some of the guys from the South, would really go at him and pound on him and gouge his eyes, whatever. So we decided it was best for Joe to get him out of the league. Yeah, thanks. with friends like you, who needs enemy? And then the more frustrating, well, they're both frustrating, but Ray Kemp, nobody had a problem with Ray Kemp, right? He's a terrific player at Duquesne, finds his way into the league. He's only a couple of years. He's really just beginning his career when, you know, the brownout begins, and Ray Kemp is forced out, and nobody has a problem with him. He's a quiet, solid lineman. He doesn't bother anybody. You know, the Joe Little thing, he's got a little bit of like Deion Sanders to him. He knows how good he is. He's the best player on the Chicago Cardinals, who are a bad team. But he leads the team in name something: receptions, rushing, total yardage, kickoff and punt returns, interceptions, defensive touchdowns. I mean, he's the best player on the team, and they got rid of him. You know, so that tells you everything you need to know.
Yep.
So when people say, "Oh," I mean, it's recently, I'm sure you remember this, it's recently 15, 20 years ago, people would say, if there were enough good black quarterbacks, they'd be playing them. These guys are competitors. They want to win. They wouldn't not play black quarterbacks just because they were black. Oh, of course not. Perish the thought. As if there was this magical moment. I mean, pick a year. What years they think it happened where all of a sudden racism just was driven from the hearts and minds of Americans, particularly rich, powerful Americans, because the owners of NFL football teams are uniformly rich and powerful. So we are now at a place in our country's history, and I'm sure you've heard about this, the stuff that's going on with Dan Snyder, and if indeed there's smoke there, and I believe I've been hearing things for a while, if indeed this ownership group, which as one of the minority partners would include Magic Johnson, if indeed this goes through, it'll be a sea change. It'll be a sea change, obviously, for the Commanders. It'll be a sea change for the NFL as a whole. And I'll throw one last thing in on the thing about ownership. I think one of the great tragedies of NFL ownership was the very premature death of a man named Reginald F. Lewis. Do you remember Reginald F. Lewis?
Yeah. Why do all the white guys have fun? I think it was.
He also was the former CEO of Beatrice Foods.
Yep.
A terrific quarterback himself at Virginia State University back in the day. And I truly believe had he not died, I think he was 49 or something, super young. Had he not died so young, I truly believe he would have been one of the first, I think he would have maybe been a managing general partner of an NFL team. With his dynamic business background, amazing ability to make money, and his football acumen and love of the game, I truly believe he would have been part of the ownership group of an NFL team probably, 30-something years ago had he not died.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a big loss. I didn't realize he died that young. Hey,
he was very young. Yeah.
Who do you think?
Very young.
Who do you think will go first? And name the names of the black quarterbacks you think will be taken in the first round.
Right. So the ones I'm sure about, 100% sure about, include C.J. Stroud, Coleridge Bernard Stroud Jr., and Bryce Young. Those two I'm 100% sure, and I'm pretty much. I think Anthony Richardson is a dead solid lock.
Yeah, that's a lock.
Yeah, eight or so picks, and then we have a maybe in Hooker. Like I said, the age thing and the getting over the ACL thing. The good news is the ACL. There's no scarring apparently so far in the process. No nerve damage. It's as, in air quotes, as good of an ACL as one can have.
Well, he must have had a good pro day. He must have had a good pro day because all of a sudden his name shot up in mentions.
Well, I mean, he didn't do anything but talk to people, but he's really good at talking to people.
Interesting.
He is. He's a personable, bright person, much like his father. And once again, we just talked about this. How different would things have been if his father had been allowed to play in the NFL? I mean, Alan Hooker was a terrific quarterback, and that's actually his son's name is also Alan. He's Alan Hendon Hooker. He's named for his father, who still holds some records at NCAA. And, like I said, he just made the mistake of being a black quarterback before being a black quarterback was cool.
Now, my question is, do you think that this tidal wave, comparatively speaking, of black quarterbacks will actually make it easier for current black quarterbacks like Jameis Winston? Here's where I'm going with this. In other words, some of the quarterbacks will not have take Anthony Richardson. It's going to take him a while to gel.
Yep.
And basically, of all the quarterbacks, the only one that I can see who's readily plug and play is Bryce Young. So does it make it better for the current black quarterbacks like, Jacoby Brissett, Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater? Does it up their value, or does it do anything?
Well, here's what I will say. I wouldn't say ups their value. I think all those guys have a fair amount of value. And you can throw Tyrod Taylor sort of on that list as well. But all of them are seen as high-level backup, bridge quarterbacks, or spot starters. Now, we could easily disagree with that assessment. I saw Tyrod Taylor take I would say, so-so Bills team, not the Bills team you're seeing now, this juggernaut. He took a so-so Bills team to the playoffs, breaking what at that time was the longest playoff drought in the active playoff drought in the NFL. Right? That wasn't Josh Allen who did it. That was Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod was still the quarterback when they finally made the playoffs again. But every single one of the guys we just named, there is a perception, at least currently, now perceptions can change, that these guys are not, quote unquote, the answer, right? The answer.
Right.
People feel like each of them have had, quote unquote, enough chances to show they could be the guy. I still think that most or not all of those guys in the right situation could be successful NFL starters. And the one with the highest ceiling, of course, is Jameis. He's also the youngest of them. And, next is Jacoby, and then next is who's on the list? Teddy, and then I guess Teddy and Jacoby are about the same age. Tyrod, I think, is 30.
And we also remember there's PJ, not Ballard. What is his name?
No, you're talking about as I somewhat jokingly say, AAF Hall of Famer PJ Walker.
Yeah, PJ Walker. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and he's another guy that is still seen as a high-level backup / spot starter type. I think any of those guys you just talked about in the right situation. I mean, how much better is a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo than the guys we just named? I don't think there's a huge difference. I don't think there's a huge differential. I don't think Garoppolo is markedly better than any of the guys we just named. I think that Walker still hasn't really been given a true chance in the NFL, but NFL teams are very strange when it comes to quarterbacks. Sometimes they seem to almost go by, sniff tests. Like I feel like they almost look at some guys and say, that guy's not a starter. And then he goes on for a while. Doesn't play badly, but they always look to replace him. There's some players, I'll never forget, it's not always black quarterbacks. Even Case Keenum. Case Keenum goes out, plays lights out, takes a team to a 14-2 record, I believe it was. Yeah. They make a playoff run. They, of course, famously knock off the Saints in the Minnesota Miracle with the ball that's tipped to Stephon Diggs.
Yep.
But they couldn't wait to replace him.
Yeah, that's right. They were it's like one and done.
It doesn't just happen to black quarterbacks. It happens a lot to black quarterbacks, but not just to black quarterbacks. Some quarterbacks will always be perceived as a guy you can somehow upgrade. We can do better than this guy, no matter what they do. It's just there's some prejudices. Not all of them are racial, but there's some prejudices in the
That's
NFL
true.
that are hard to say.
That's true.
Sometimes I literally think they just look at a player and think, he doesn't look like a starter to me, which I think is an incredibly, with all the data we have, why would people still go by I get it. They like to trust their gut or whatever. It just frustrates me when I can see decisions are being made by what I call the mental picture quarterback equation.
You know what? I think that whole data thing is a little overblown. I think there are people who value it, but the people who should value it are not the people who are in the place where they should be using it to make their decisions. My point is, my sense of the whole thing is that in some teams compartmentalize the data issue, and it's almost like they do it just to say they have it, but really it's seat of the pants and who they know and all that jazz.
What teams are using data is they're using it the same way that you would use things like sprinkles or nuts on your sundae. You make the sundae and you realize, oh, I should put something over the top of it. And then they call their analytics guys and say, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this. Give us some reasons that we should have done the thing we're going to do.
But it's worse. The analytics guys now, they treat them like gophers. Go get me coffee. That's how the Commanders, in the account that I read that was written by, I believe, my friend Mike Silver, that's how they handled it at the time. It's like a forgotten thing. It's like, a throwaway almost. And
that differs from team to team, but you're right. There are some teams where they don't take it seriously really at all. There are teams that take it super seriously too, though.
Yeah.
I mean, at the other end of the spectrum, we have teams like the Browns, who are very analytically driven.
Well, Bill, I'm going to close you out there, and we'll be back tomorrow. And hey, stick around in the background, as I say, Bill.
Okay.
Thanks for this. There's your first cut of black quarterbacks in history, the 2023 NFL Draft. Subscribe to Zennie62 and bookmark OaklandNewsNowBlog.com and Zennie62.com. We'll be back tomorrow. See ya. All right. Hold on. That ends this broadcast. All right.